Here's how I made these DIY nightstands. I took inspiration from the Bluff nightstand from Parachute, and I utilized a tutorial from Shara's Woodshop Diaries. And I don't have a whole lot of experience with woodworking, but that did not stop me. Total I spent for this project was a little over $300, but could be more or less depending on what you already have. These are my plans for building 2 nightstands. Like I said, the inspo was the Bluff nightstands from Parachute that are $800 for one of them. And if that's not inspiration to build it yourself, I don't know what is. Initially, I wanted to build drawers too, but decided against it because I was tired and I've never done it before, and we'll just revisit that later. So these are the plans. I tried my best to copy the exact dimensions of the Bluff one, which I got pretty close. And I tried to get away with one piece of plywood, but it was going to be impossible, so I had to get 2 sheets of 8 by 4 feet birch plywood. And I chose birch because I like it. So this is like the cut layout that I took to Home Depot to have them cut. I didn't have them cut every single piece. I just had them cut like 10 pieces that were all 15 inches wide. And ignore that 19.5. These were my initial plans. Anywho, it was quite the puzzle to figure out, but we did it, and now we're ready to move on to the next step. Here are the tools and materials that I used besides the plywood. This is my shopping list and everything I spent money on to build this. I got everything at Home Depot, and I'll link everything in my LTK to make it easier. And total I spent was a little over $300, which is pretty good considering I got 2 nightstands out of it. To build the nightstands, I used a drill with the 1/4-inch wood drill bit thing, 1/4-inch dowel pins and wood glue, orbital sander, 220 and 60 grit sandpaper, a circular saw, a cutting guide, wood filler and a putty knife, C-clamps, more clamps, measuring square, masking tape, and protective gear. Oh, and also a hammer. Okay, step 1, cutting everything down to size. These are my finalized plans, and I used a circular saw and a cutting guide to cut down each of the following sizes: 8 1/4 by 15 inches for the inner sides, 17 by 15 inches for the spacing between each box, also known as the sandwiches, 21 by 15 inches for the tops and bottoms for each box, and then 9 3/4 by 15 inches for the outer sides. And I needed 8 of each of those pieces to make 4 boxes or 2 sets of nightstands. And to cut the pieces down to size, I measured with my measuring square, and I used the cutting guide and my circular saw to cut everything out. And I highly recommend the cutting guide because it truly made everything perfectly straight. Once all the pieces are cut, we can move on to assembling. So to build the boxes, you're going to need 2 of each piece. Unfortunately, I didn't do a good job of filming me actually assembling them, so I'm hoping this footage can do a good job of explaining. So the top and bottoms and inner sides are going to be attached together using the dowels by drilling holes into these pieces. And once the tops and bottoms and inner sides are assembled, the outer sides will then be attached onto the sides with just wood glue. So get out your wood glue, dowels, and a drill, and use the 1/4-inch bit to drill holes into the wood. I drilled holes at 2.5, 7.5, and 12.5 on both sides of the inner sides, which are the 8 1/4 by 15 inch pieces. And I used masking tape as a template so you don't have to constantly remeasure, which was risky, but it saved me some time. So I kind of just did this to all of the inner side pieces before I moved on to drilling holes into the bottom and top piece of the box, which were the 21 by 15 inch pieces. Yeah, so I also marked with masking tape the sides I wanted to be exposed, which is just a little tip. So now we spread the glue onto the sides of the inner side, and kind of make sure it also gets into the holes so the dowels can be stuck on there once the glue cures. And I used a hammer to kind of get them in there because, I mean, they're supposed to be snug. And then I kind of just did the same thing for the tops and bottom pieces, spread the glue and made sure some glue got into the holes. Also, be careful with using too much glue because you don't want it to get too messy. Now comes the fun part of actually assembling the boxes. You're just going to insert the dowels into the holes and line them up. And if they don't line up exactly, that's what the hammer is for. Just take like a scrap piece of wood before you hammer so you don't damage the wood you like that you're actually using. And then after this is done, the outer sides will be glued to the sides. And I used my measuring square to make sure the box was at 90 degrees and it wasn't a parallelogram. And I just really secured it with a bunch of clamps to make sure it wasn't going to move. And you're just going to repeat this process until you have 4 boxes made. So this is what it was starting to look like with the spacing pieces on the bottom of each box. Also really made sure it was clamped straight. I used these L-shaped pieces to make sure that it was at 90 degrees and it stayed at 90 degrees while the glue cured. And I know Home Depot sells like a special clamp, but they were like $25 a piece, and I said maybe not. So I just made those makeshift ones, and yeah, it's coming along. Also, since there were some spaces, I just used the wood filler and the putty knife to fill them in. Once the glue is dry, it's time to sand. I grabbed something circular that fits onto the corner of the box so I could draw a semicircle on all of the corners. A compass would have done just fine too, but this acts as a guide for when we round off the edges of the box with the sander to give it its circular, round, oblong look. And I used the 60 grit sandpaper to sand it down to the line faster since it was more coarse. And when the corners are all done, sand it down using the 220 grit sandpaper to get that thing baby soft. And once it's baby soft, get all the dust off of it. And I mean all of it, because you don't want it sealed in when you put in your polyurethane or whatnot. Step 4, gluing a little more and final assembly. Okay, now we gotta glue the boxes together so they start looking like the dang picture. And to do this, we're gonna now need to take 2 of the 17-inch by 15-inch pieces and glue them together to make a sandwich. We're going to make 4 of these sandwich pieces since they are going to be essentially glued to the bottom of each box. You're also going to want to pick which boxes you want as the tops and bottoms and mark them with some masking tape. And once the glue is fully set, take one of the sandwich pieces and start gluing it to the box. I took my measuring square and made pencil marks on the box, I think about 2.5 inches on each side, just to make sure that the sandwich was going to be centered on it. And as mentioned before, there's essentially going to be a sandwich piece glued to the bottom of each box. I grabbed my measuring square again just to make sure that the boxes were sitting right on top of each other and nothing was out of place. I used my bigger C-clamps to clamp it into place, and I put a piece of thicker paper in between the clamp and the wood just so it wouldn't leave an indent on it. And then I just applied the last piece to the bottom. You don't have to follow the exact order I did this in, you just gotta do it. And it's looking pretty great if you ask me. Alright, I got one set done, one more to go. Gonna do the same thing, glue them sandwich pieces to the bottom and to the middle between the 2 boxes. In other words, one sandwich is going on the bottom of one box, one sandwich is going on the other. And of course, that middle one is just going to be glued between the both boxes. And of course, I had to take out my measuring square and make sure everything was centered. Finally, the last step was applying a protective seal. I used this polyurethane matte, fast-drying water-based one from Behr and a brush. And also, if you would like to stain it, now is probably the time before you put the protective finish onto it. But I chose not to put a stain on it, so I just moved on to the protective finish. I only bought an 8 ounce of the polyurethane, and that was not enough, so I had to use it strategically. So I would definitely buy double. And once that and the glue is dry, you can move it into your room. I put some decor pieces on there, and I got my wire situation all set up, moved them into place, and they turned out so beautifully. I'm so happy with them. Everyone thinks they're so cool. If you build them, I'm sure you'll be the talk of the town. Anywho, just gonna set some vibes and let you enjoy my masterpiece. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments.